Alright everyone, we're almost done with this crate, and we're getting super close to the end, so let's get at it. So, with our crate beautifully textured, we've noticed that in my case, and maybe yours as well, some of my scaling is not quite consistent. So some of the wooden planks are a little bit bigger in some areas, but it's very small in the other ones. It's also possible that in your case that the direction of some of your walls might not be consistent. So you might have some running up and down, some running left to right, and you want everything to be consistent. This is a UV problem. So we're going to go to layout to make it easier to select. I'll just turn on material preview so we can see everything. And then I'm just going to select everything related to my crate meshes. Then head back into the UV editing tab. The first thing is when we're here is that we want to do a lot of the work on the islands over here. So if you do have a background image texture still here, which maybe you still have the UV grid texture, you want to unlink it or deselect it. So the way you would do that is if you have an image in the back, I'll just use the crate ref for instance. You're going to press the X on the top here to unlink it. It's going to give you the empty grid background. The purpose of this is just to give us something visually easier to work with. When you're in this UV editing space, you should already come with an idea of what you want to fix. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these axes that have been with us forever. And let's focus here. So we already know from our discussion earlier that my problem right now is I want the scaling to be consistent. Okay, and in your problem as well, you also want to know which direction if you're using the wooden walls texture like I'm doing as well. So I've been a little bit lucky in my case because all of the walls on the outside and even in the inside, they're all facing up and down. But for the sake of the tutorial, let's say I want them all to be left to right. So I need to change my direction as well. So what I'm going to do first is that everything related to what I want to change, which are these walls, I'm going to select all of them with L, and also grab everything in the inside as well. Okay, it is also possible that sometimes when you select the wall based on your seams that the inside already gets selected as well, but that is not a big deal. I also want to grab our flooring as well because I want the scaling of that to be consistent too. Okay, and when selecting all of these meshes, if you might notice that you need to hide some of the meshes just to access some points, go ahead and do that easily by hiding the meshes in your outliner. Now you've noticed that when I've selected all of these walls in this case, some of the walls are pretty much intact, like these ones, but it seems like the vented walls, they have the space missing in the middle, and those extra parts seem to be scattered everywhere. So through creating seams and through packing islands, it's gotten a little bit broken up here and there. So just double check that you have all the pieces that you want to configure when we are changing the scaling and the rotation as well. Okay, so to help us get consistent scaling, in the UV editor, we're going to select the UV menu, and we're going to click Average Island Scale. And by clicking this, Blender will attempt to average all of your UV islands based on their area in the 3D viewport in 3D space. So let's do that. And I use this trick to start off with, and you can see that Blender has actually done a pretty decent job. So if I compare, neighboring faces, it looks like all the wooden planks seem to roughly be around the same size on the outside and the middle as well. So Blender's done a pretty good job. But if you notice in some case that maybe something is a little bit bigger or smaller than another, you can go back, of course, and just manually select what you want, or manually select a piece over here, and then try to scale it as well. But I think everything is roughly the same size, and I could prove this by, if I select one of the walls, for instance, I can press G to move it and sort of hover it over some of my other wall meshes over here. And you can see that they are all roughly the same size, proving to me that all of my walls or the tiles are approximately or almost identical, which is great. Now, the next is the direction that I want to change. So I've discussed that I want to make all of these walls, instead of up and down, left to right. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those as well. So it's really the same set of things that I'm selecting over here, but I'm not going to select the flooring, only because it doesn't really matter in this case which way the flooring points. If you do have a preference, if it points towards the vent or away from the vent, you could select that as well. So, we know that because these UV islands have their own transforms, we know that by rotating this, it's going to change the texture as well. And I could prove that a little bit by trying to rotate it, and you could see the wooden texture pieces over here. They're spinning around as I am moving them. But we also notice a problem. In my UV editor, everything is spinning around a circle, where the center point of that circle, if you can follow that faint dotted line, everything's just spinning around a circle. And this is not what we want. We don't want all of our selected meshes to spin around a central point. Instead, we want to keep the position of where everything is, but we want to spin every single island individually around themselves. This is a pivot problem, and the way that we change pivots is that we select this pivot dropdown. So this bounding box center option that we have selected, this is what happens when we rotate in a circle, or gives us the option to rotate in a circle, but what we really want is to rotate around individual origins. And now if I press R on my keyboard to rotate, you can see that all of my islands are spinning in place. And this is what I want. So, if my wooden planks are facing up to down and I want them left to right, that is a 90-degree rotation. So I'm going to roughly do it 90 degrees, open up the drop-down pop-up menu, and manually select it to -90 degrees. You could also go 90 degrees, which will just be left to right, but in the other direction. But I think I'll stick with -90 for now. And the result that we get, all of our wooden textures are now pointing left to right, including the middle as well. Beautiful. Now all of my other meshes, in this case, they're consisting of solid colors. So as you would imagine, if you try to rotate solid colors, it's still going to give you the same result. But what you might have noticed as well is that we also have a little bit of smudging as well. So if I select this face, for instance, and I rotate it, the smudging is going to move, but the color is going to stay the same. Now, in my opinion, smudging is smudging, and fingerprints behave however they want, so the orientation of them, because they're so faint, is not super important to me, so I don't need to change this at all. Okay, and all of the other meshes that I have here, they're all pretty much solid colors, so I don't need to do any additional UV island tweaking with respect to scale and rotation. The last thing that I want to point out is almost like a bonus, because I've not talked about it super much, but it is the concept of face orientation. In Blender, every single face that we have has two sides, but only one of the sides consists of a normal vector, and this normal vector indicates which direction a face is facing. And I can demonstrate this with a plane. So I'm going to add an object, a random object outside of my crate. We're going to add simply a plane. And I'm just going to scale this plane up a little bit. So a plane is an example of a face. It has one side, which is on top, another side on the bottom. So to determine our face's orientation, we can open up this overlays drop-down menu, and under the geometry heading, select face orientation. With this selected, faces are going to have one side colored blue. This indicates the face that is pointing outwards, the one that we want to see. And the other side is going to be red. This is the side that is pointing inwards. When you export an object out of Blender, you typically or always want to make sure that all of the blue faces are showing up on the outside. Because again, these are the faces that you want to see. For instance, if this plane, which we could see has the blue orientation on top, or the blue coloring on top, so I will take this away. Let's say this plane represents a ground. And this ground has a texture, which I'm just going to use example material 1. Because this face has a blue orientation face, the normal vectors are pointing towards us. Meaning that when I look at this crate from top down, I'm going to see our lovely red color for our flooring. However, if I view this ground from the other side, maybe I look upwards from it, this plane is going to look completely invisible. Or in other words, you're going to see right through it. Now the red and blue colors are not going to show up because this is Blender's debugging tool over here. But if you ever go inside of a game or export one of your models and you notice that, hey, I can actually see through my mesh, you have a problem with inverted normals. So with your crate, you want to make sure that whenever you're looking on the outside, everything is blue. Let's say you're looking at some of your crate and some faces are blatantly red. The way that you would change this is that you will select the mesh that's a problem, click the face that has a red face on it, and then under mesh, you're going to go to normal, so Alt-N is the shortcut, and you're going to press flip. So now this face has a red face, so the normals are pointing inwards, and hence if I look through this mesh in a game, I'm actually going to see right through this face over here. And of course, to put it back, I could just flip the normals the other way. I need to select it first. There we go. Now you don't have to do this one by one. You could select multiple faces at once. So the easiest thing I would say to do is just select all of your meshes together with A, select everything that's red, then flip it all at once. Okay, so back into object mode, we are going to spend a little bit of time just going around looking. And immediately I could see some red peeking out over here. So this means that if a character were to walk up to this crate and actually look at the crate from this angle, you might see a little bit of peeking through. And we don't want this. Now this red coloring over here shows up on all four sides. Why is that? The reason for this is these top edge pieces. Look at what happens if I hide it. Those red pieces that we have over here, well, these are okay and are allowed to be red because these are inside of the meshes. But these red pieces over here on the walls, these are the ones peeking through. Initially, we deleted these top faces of the walls because we assumed that those faces will never be seen to each other. But face orientation proves that actually a little piece peeks out a little bit. Now, we don't want this. We want to make sure that the player can never see through the mesh at all, and this tells us that we want to actually seal off these top pieces. So this is related to the walls, so I'm going to select both of my walls over here and go into edit mode. And I want to patch these faces back up. So let's go out of face orientation to make it easier. And my goal here is to repair these faces that I initially thought I didn't need, but it turns out I did. So select all the edges to fill in a face. The easiest way I did it was holding Alt and then clicking it, because I know that this is an edge loop. Or you can manually select all four edges individually. But with that done, you can press F on your keyboard, and that will fill in a face. And I'm going to do that for all of them. Okay, don't worry too much about if it's not important. So in this case, we have some stretching going on. So some of the UV islands might have some stretching as well. This one is good. And finally, this one as well. So each of them look a little bit different, but we aspire to get it a little bit more consistent. So the way that we're going to fix that is, because these are already selected, when I go into UV editing, these are the faces that I want to change. Okay, so they're highlighted over here, and you can see that this quadrilateral is not a rectangle. So this is the reason why this one has a lot of stretching. Let's fix that so that they're all rectangles. The easiest way to do that is we could just smart UV project them so that they all become rectangles. Put a little bit of an island margin. So right now they are super large, so they have super small wooden planks. But we're just going to make all of them small like this and roughly place it inside. Okay, the sizing of these planks over here are not super important for me because initially these faces were deleted, so I never planned to see them anyways. But specifically, if I put these back, you would notice that if a player were to walk up over here and peek through this, they're not going to be able to see through the mesh, but they're also not going to be able to see much of the texture of the walls itself. So unless they're super big, where the planks are very, very visible, having them roughly around a smaller size is not that big of a deal. So we'll just choose a rough size like this, and we'll put it outside of the grid for now. Let's go back into layout, turn on face orientation, and now if I view the crate everywhere, I don't really see any flashes of red, indicating to me that I've done a good job. Now if you're super zoomed out, you're going to see a little bit of red. I think it's a little bit of a bug, or Blender has a different rendering problem when you're viewing meshes far away. But what's important is that up close, nothing looks red. Everything looks blue. So all of our face orientation is good. We can go back to the select everything, go back to the UV editing tab to debug this. Now you may have noticed, obviously, that through this process, some of my islands are not inside of the grid. Clearly these 4 that I've created, but also some of the rotated ones. And then some islands are overlapping from each other due to when we rotated some of these meshes. We don't want that. Overlapping meshes will start to share pixels from a different object. Instead, we want all of our islands to have their own unique colors and unique pixels. Okay? And because the image texture is going to place inside of this grid area, it's going to be very hard for Blender to predict, or for us to predict, what the colors of these faces outside are going to look like. We want to have a little bit more control of that. So the way that we do that is we're going to select all of the islands. So all of them are going to be orange. And we're going to go to the UV menu and select Pack Islands. Now, because we've already gone through the trouble of scaling and rotating the islands to make sure that the texture is to our standards, we want to reflect this to Blender by deselecting scale and rotation. So this is going to tell Blender, hey, try to pack all the islands that I have over here, but do not modify any of the scaling or the rotations when doing so. So we're going to click OK. And you can see that Blender has tried to pack all of them up together. But unfortunately, a lot of these meshes are now popping around on the outside here, which is a little bit of a shame, because we do see that there are some bits and pieces or empty spaces where these pieces could have gone, but, Blender can only guess so far. So we need to discuss a few ways of how we can change this. The first way that we could change this is I could change my pivot back to bounding box center, and then press S on my keyboard to scale everything so slightly, and then press G on my keyboard to fill it in. So I've scaled everything shortly, press G on my keyboard, so now everything is filled up. This typically is a very good way to fix everything. Now, because I've scaled everything down a little bit and moved everything slightly, obviously some of the textures are going to change a little bit. Now, if this has changed in a way that completely bothers you, where it cuts off at a point that you don't like, or the scaling is not up quite to your standards in the rare case, well, we can discuss a second way of how we can fix this. But for most people, this is usually good enough. If I press Ctrl Z to go back, like this, the next thing that you could do is under UV islands. When we're packing the islands, we also notice that we have an option to change the marginal value. This marginal value tells us Blender the distance that we want between any two islands, which right now is set to 0.01 meters. Of course, if we decrease the size of this, maybe if I half it, then Blender is going to attempt to pack everything without changing the scaling rotation, but closely packed together. So if I press OK, you can see that it's done exactly that. But now we've got a huge amount of empty space, which we want to fill up. Now again, the reason you want to fill this grid space up is because when you create image textures for your materials, those images are going to show up on this grid background. Now, because images consist of pixels, the more pixels that your island contains, the better resolution it's going to be. I can prove this to you by going back using the crate ref ping, and if you zoom in, you can see all the pixels of that image. So the more pixels, the better the resolution. The less amount of pixels, the poorer the resolution. Okay, so you definitely want to take advantage of trying to fill up the space. Okay, so it looks like in this case that I'm just going to Control Z and play around with the margin a little bit. So maybe I'll go 0.009, which seems to be good enough. Maybe I could slightly, if I'm really picky, make it like that 0.092, which is a little bit better. So just play around with it a little bit until you're happy with everything and everything fills up inside of the grid. Okay, and that's all that we need to do with respect to the UV editor. Okay, so changing the scaling, rotation, and also catching up anything that you might want to add back due to what has been reported in your face orientation. Okay, so with all of the UVs said and done, we don't need to touch that anymore. And in the last lesson, we're going to take everything's finished, and get ready to export it. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Take care.